Welcome to the Campus Salt Show, where we open a window into the lives of students and faculty and alumni at Bellingham Technical College, and also open a window into the life and teachings of one of the most influential people in human history, Jesus of Nazareth. We have Lizzy as our guest. She's a student at Bellingham Technical College. Lizzy, can you tell us your last name and how to pronounce it?
My last name is Schermerhorn.
Schermerhorn.
It's
Okay.
not super difficult. You just drop the C at the beginning.
She's in the culinary department or program, I guess you say, BTC. What's one thing that you wish you would have known before you started taking classes?
One thing I wish I would have known before starting my classes is that it's a lot more involved than you might think than with the textbook work. We're not just reading textbooks and doing stuff like that. It's we're actually having to apply them in our classes when we are in person.
Have you made any mistakes since you've been at BTC?
Not really. I mean, the closest thing to a mistake is I cut my fingernail using my knife.
Okay.
I've never cut my skin, but in the preparation for my classes, a mistake that I made was failing to check with the financial aid department that certain scholarships had been applied for for the quarter.
Okay.
And so then it's the process of making sure they're applied for the next quarter.
So, recommendations to people who are considering going to BTC.
Always check don't be afraid to email the people you might need to contact if you have any questions at all. Your counselors are always there for you and willing to help you, even if you think it's a silly question.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
And careful with the knives.
Yes.
Now, if someone is thinking about doing a culinary career or thinking about transitioning from high school to BTC, do you have any advice for either of those situations?
In either of the situations, I would say to just stick with your gut. If you're committed to going into that program, don't let people sway you from that, because some people don't consider BTC to be a 4-year college like it is. There are 4-year programs in it. And so they don't think that it's a viable option, that a lot of schools push going to 4-year universities. But BTC is 100% an option for that.
I see. So I didn't realize you can get a bachelor's degree from Bellingham Tech.
Yeah.
In culinary?
Not in
other
culinary. Culinary only goes up to the associates, but
Okay.
they do have bachelors in business operations.
Okay.
So
Any other misconceptions about BTC or culinary arts?
just because it's a tech school, it doesn't mean it's going to be the easy ride.
Okay.
Your classes are still going to be difficult,
Yeah.
and you're not just going to fly by with the breeze.
Who are the 3 people who've been most influential for you?
I would say that my parents, as a unit of one, would be one of them, just because, they're always giving the hard truth. Sometimes you just have to hear it, but also not delivering it in a way that, is this sucks, deal with it.
Right.
But also helping to get through it. And then I would say my godparents, just because they've had such an active role in my life. I call them my second set of parents.
Yeah.
Just because I'm super close with them and their kids. And, it's always somewhere that I can go if I needed to get away. It was really nice to go and hang out with them. And then I would also say my boyfriend has been super influential, just because I was going through a lot of stuff this year, and he was just there and helping me to work through it, not just get past it, but work through it.
Right. Can you elaborate a little bit on your godparents? How did that happen? How did that get started? Most people don't have godparents.
So my godparents are the best friends of my parents.
Okay.
And so my parents and my godparents used to work together and go to church together. And so they kind of just built a bond there. And then from that, they became my godparents, and I built a bond with their kids, and so we've kind of just all become one big family.
I was going to ask you if you're in a relationship. It sounds like you are.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about him?
His name is Jacob, and he is really sweet and kind. He's probably one of the best things for me right now, just because of being able to work through things, and helping me work through them. And, you know, sometimes I can be a little bit shy, and he's the exact opposite. And so it's good to just like have someone who pushes me to go out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. And you mentioned some hard things the last year.
Yes.
What things have you been working through the last year?
Just last year my dad passed away, and so that was a really tough moment for me. And in my previous relationship before Jacob, I kind of suppressed it rather than working through it.
Right.
And it just wasn't a good situation. So when I ended that relationship, I started to work through it, and then I didn't want to rush into anything. And so Jacob and I were talking just as friends at first. And he was already helping me to work through some of the things I was struggling with. And then once we became an official couple, it just became more prevalent that he was there for me and helping me through these things.
Right. Yeah, that's intense, especially, I mean, you know, I'm almost 40 and my parents are still living. So it's pretty uncommon for someone your age to have to deal with that. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
It was really hard at first just because I'd just gotten back from a work training exercise up at the Firs, and I was gone for 9 days. And it was the day that I got back, like he and my mom had picked me up, and we had gone shopping and done our normal stuff. And then I'd gone out with my boyfriend at the time to go watch a movie, and my parents were staying back to go work on the gardens at our house. And you know, everything seemed fine. And then once the movie ended and I actually looked at my phone, I had frantic texts from my mom, you know, telling me to get to the hospital. And it was shocking because I didn't know how to process it. It had happened within hours.
Since then, in the months past, can you give an example of what like suppressing versus working through is or looks like?
Part of what helps me to work through things is like, you know, you have to cry about things.
Right.
Like, it's not necessarily a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you've been strong for too long. And so like, that's part of my process is, you know, you have to cry about it, let those feelings out. But I wasn't letting myself do that. I was like, you know, I need to be done crying about this. I have to move on with my life. And so that was part of what I was doing to suppress it. And not really talking about it either. But when I went on a missions trip to Bolivia just a month later, like it really opened the doors because I shared my testimony while we were there.
Right.
And it was a really emotional night, not just for me, but for my interpreter.
Right.
Catching him off guard as a father himself.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the mission trip, what you guys were doing?
So we went there, and on the first day that we went to work, you know, it took us 36 hours to get there, which is crazy. But once we got there, you know, it started to sprinkle, and the pastor of the church we were going to help rebuild was freaking out, thinking we weren't going to be willing to help him build. And the missionary that we went through was like, they're from the Pacific Northwest. This is nothing. And then by the time we got there, it was sunshine. And we'd started to build the supporting walls around the existing church that had grown too small for their village. It was one of the farming villages around there.
A lot of students are working a job while they're going to school. Some even full-time, some half-time. Are you working?
Well, I was working last week for about a week.
Okay.
I got hired at Rustler's/Rusty Wagon up in Linden, working in the kitchens, which was really nice being in the culinary program.
Yeah.
And then the new mandate came out and they shut down to goes only and
Right.
no longer needed me on staff. So I was
Right.
laid off in a sense, but that on the understanding that once things open up again, that I would still have a job with them.
Right. Right. Yeah, that stinks. Can you tell me a little bit about your cooking history? Have you always loved cooking? Is it more baking or cooking proper, or where did your interests start with that? And is it a passion for you, something you do for fun? And is that going to get messed up doing it for work?
Well, I've kind of always liked cooking and baking. My mom tells me stories about how I would make mud pies and let them bake as a kid in the sun.
Yeah.
And then like when I was around 7, I started making desserts for family gatherings and stuff like that. And so it really just kind of became one of the things that I really enjoyed doing, and I was passionate about it. And then when I took a class in my sophomore year, I took nutrition and wellness and then an intro into culinary arts. I found myself saying, I could do this for a career. And kind of basing it off the saying how you never work a day in your life if you enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, hopefully, knock on wood. And the schoolwork, I mean, you've had opportunity now to where you're not just cooking for fun, whatever you feel like. You have to cook what they're asking you to. Yeah. And so far, it's been enjoyable.
Yeah.
Is it strict, like in terms of how you do things, or do you have a lot of freedom to elaborate or try your own twist on things?
For the most part, in the classes, we're following the recipes. Like just this last week, we did roasting a chicken, and we were told we didn't have to brine the chicken, but then if you didn't, you got docked points. So
you kind of have to. I see. So it's not like a cooking show where everyone does something with their own spin. It's more everyone's trying to follow the recipe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the end, what is it, your 7th quarter, when you get to work in the restaurant, is there more freedom there, or for your final?
The last quarter where you're working in the restaurant, you're in a sense making your own menu and you're preparing it and stuff. And so there is a bit more freedom in that sense that, you're making the food you want to make, but it's for other people. So, some stuff might have to be to their order.
And do you have a preference for baking versus cooking?
I prefer baking over cooking just because I feel like with baking, you can add a little bit more of your personal touches to the things. There's less cook to order things to do. Like with cooking, you cook a steak how the customer wants it.
From the youth group stories, it sounds like you're into church stuff. Can you explain a little bit more about your faith background?
So I grew up in a Christian home. Both of my parents, have being the basis of believing in Jesus Christ. And so we all, as kids, grew up going to church and whatnot and going to Sunday school. But ultimately, they left it to us to decide for ourselves because it's not something they can force upon us. It's not true belief.
Right.
And so, I had a decision to make, and I chose to believe in Jesus, my Savior. So I am a Christian.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit for viewers and listeners who aren't familiar with youth groups and churches? What is youth group like?
But it's a time where you can, hang out with people of the same beliefs as you and, get to know them better, but also learn more about what the Bible says. At 412, they had different series, like they had a relationship series that we would go through in February. And so it's like just delving into small topics that the Bible covers and breaking them down so that you can understand them.
Lizzy, for the signature question of the Campus Salt Show, why do you believe what you believe? Just personally, for you, what is it that convinces you or has led you down this path?
Well, I think growing up in the Christian household kind of lended to, supporting that belief and having a support system for what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it was always like I would hear something and I would always want to fact check it, and I would pull out my Bible and I would, say, what does the Bible say? And so then at that point, it wasn't necessarily of like taking in what other people hear, but knowing that like what God says in the Bible, has the ultimate standing for me. Mm-hmm. And so not necessarily worrying about what other people say, because like growing up, it's really easy as a girl to like take in what, the people say about how you look or like size and stuff. And so it's like really easy to take in the opinion of others. But then at the end of the day, knowing that what God says about me, what he feels about me is more important than what they say. And so it's because of that I kind of took to heart that, I am a Christian. I am a child of God, and it's who I am, and nobody can take that away from me.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. So it's rooted in your identity, basically.
Yeah.
And self-worth and value. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been fun. Good to get to know you a little bit. Do you have anything else you wanted to share?
Not really.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you're making?
So right now I'm making the Creole mustard sauce for our Parmesan chicken tenders. And so I mixed it up ahead of time. It has heavy whipping cream, sour cream, Creole mustard, cayenne peppers. And so I'm just heating it up so that it's more of a sauce. Get that thicker consistency so it's not like a soup. Because right now it's kind of runny, so it's not really the soft consistency that we want.
And these are all ingredients for the recipe?
Yes.
So are you caramelizing?
I'm sauteing the onions just so that they start to release their flavor and aroma as I add in other greens and stuff for it as well.
What were you doing when you got your fingernail?
When I cut my fingernail, I was chopping an onion. I've not done it since.
How do you know when the saute is done?
It's not really like a time frame of when it's done. It's after all the ingredients have been added, and it's not like when you first add in something, it's really fluffy, and so the process of sauteing, it kind of breaks it down and makes it smaller, so it doesn't take up as much room on the plate that it would go on. I just put in a little bit of basil. Before that, it was Swiss chard, and then before that, it was kale.
Do you know who makes the recipes?
We get the recipes from the cookbook that is like our textbook for the quarter.
This is oil?
This is clarified butter, so it's just pounds and pounds of butter that we've cooked down and then taken out. We've skimmed off the impurities, and so what it does is it just creates a higher smoke point for it.
What's this?
So this is the chicken that has been dredged, so dipped in flour and then dipped in an egg wash and then dipped in a panko breading with Parmesan and parsley.
Okay.
And so this is the parts that will be going with the sauce and the greens that we made. Filet mignon, we made it to order for others in the building. So that we can learn to cook for others as well as ourselves. And just so we're not wasting food.
Right.
But sometimes if there's a lot of extra food, we get to take it home. Otherwise, we get to eat it.
Right.
But we're also doing that for all the other dishes. We're not eating everything off the plate.
Right. What are you looking for?
The chicken is just a bit taller than I had oil for, so I'm just making sure that all sides are being cooked
Okay.
fully. I'm just trying to be really careful so I don't lose that breading.
Right. Welcome to the Understanding Jesus segment of the Campus Salt Show. Jesus of Nazareth is one of the most influential and important people in all human history. So I believe there's great value in gaining an accurate understanding of his life and teaching. Personally, I believe there's an even more important reason to understand him. I believe he was and is who he and his followers claimed he was. But I'm going to try to stay out of the way and focus on helping you understand what he said and did, and let you judge for yourself. Many of the things that you hear about Jesus in popular culture, sometimes even in churches, are basically just extrapolations from a concept like grace or forgiveness. That's not what we're going to do here. We want to give you a clear understanding of Jesus of Nazareth, what he actually said and did, what he was actually all about. We're going to do this by working from the source documents, and as best as we can, understanding them in light of their historic and literary context. First, we're going to look at what source documents are available. Then we'll consider what it means to understand them in their historic and literary context. Finally, we'll discuss the choice of which document to focus on for the remainder of this series. So, first, the source documents. The two best non-Christian source documents are from a Romano-Jewish historian named Josephus and a Roman historian named Tacitus. Unfortunately, these documents only include brief references about Jesus, so they don't tell us much. They tell us that he received the death penalty, a Roman crucifixion, by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. The documents that tell us more, the only detailed source documents that we have, dating back to the 1st century, are written by Christians. These are commonly known as the four Gospels. They're referred to as the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to Luke, and the Gospel according to John, or abbreviated as simply Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, all historians are biased to some degree, but these documents are clearly biased in a pro-Jesus direction, since they were written by those who believed that Jesus was Israel's promised Messiah. Now, some scholars have attempted to remove the bias to guess at what Jesus originally said or meant by starting from these Christian documents and removing material that they believe is unlikely to have been authentic to Jesus. Their assumption is that the early Christian community added to or misconstrued what Jesus said or did, that they put words in his mouth to promote their favorite teachings or beliefs. Personally, I think it's unlikely that Jesus' immediate followers substantially altered or misconstrued what Jesus said and did in these documents, since they are early, especially the Gospel according to Mark, which was written just a few decades after Jesus' crucifixion. Now, at this time, Jesus' disciples and most of his family would have still been active in the Christian community at that time. However, even if they did misconstrue what Jesus actually said and did, these are the only detailed source documents that we have. The alternative is to simply guess at what we think Jesus may have said and done. And even if you want to do that, I think there's still value in understanding Jesus as he is presented in the four Gospels. Now let's talk about the historic and literary context. The Gospel accounts need to be understood in their context. It's natural to read a document as if it were written within the last decade, or at least the last century. If you read about a man in downtown Seattle forming a group of 12 followers who are all male and all the same race, you might be right to wonder if he's sexist and racist. But if you understand Jesus' actions in light of his historic context, the ancient Middle Eastern culture he lived in, you'll see that the way he treated outsiders, people from other races, and women was shockingly egalitarian and inclusive. But it's not enough to read the Gospels in their historic context. We also need to take into account their literary context. You might think that means the Greco-Roman biographies of the time. And although they do bear many similarities to these biographies, the Gospels do have important differences. In order to accurately understand the Gospels, we have to understand them not simply as a Greco-Roman biography about a teacher with provocative things to say or a life well lived, but rather we have to read them in their true literary context as a sequel to Israel's prophetic writings. This is how the documents present themselves, as we'll see next time in the second episode. Not only as a sequel to Israel's prophetic writings, but as their fulfillment. Now, finally, we need to decide which of these four gospel accounts we're going to focus on in this series. As we mentioned earlier, there's four: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And given time constraints, we need to pick one to focus on. Now, of the four, Mark was written first. Matthew and Luke include virtually everything that's in Mark, but they supplement it in different ways. And they're clearly written to a particular audience. Matthew to a Jewish audience, Luke to a Greco-Roman audience. John is different from the other three. It was written later and has more of a theological and philosophical bent to it. Well, to me, the choice is clear, but maybe that's because Mark is my favorite. But still, I think there are some good reasons to focus on the Gospel according to Mark. It's not only the earliest of the four Gospels, it's also the shortest. It has the core message that all four Gospels contain. And it's full of action. And I like that it has the themes of suffering and persecution woven throughout it. Many scholars believe it was written during the early Roman persecution of Christians, and that the content is mostly the Apostle Peter's personal memoirs, recorded and edited by Mark. Now, tradition has it that Peter was crucified in Rome in AD 64. I like to think that the abrupt ending of Mark may have been due to Peter and Mark rushing to finish the manuscript, and Peter's involvement being cut short due to his crucifixion. Now, we've discussed the source documents, we've talked about understanding them in their historic and literary context, and we've talked about the choice of which document to focus on. So in the next episode, we'll dive in to the beginning of the Gospel according to Mark. Well, that is a wrap for the first episode of the Campus Salt Show. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you're a student and you're open to being interviewed on the show, please email me at director@btcsalt.org. I'd love to schedule you in. We know it can be hard to get to know other students during the season with the pandemic and classes being online and labs being limited. So we hope that you'll take advantage of these interviews to get to know other students and let others get to know you on a little bit deeper level. Also, if you are a student, we have 3 mentors who would love to sit down and meet with you, especially if you're interested in finding out more about following Jesus or if you're struggling in your faith. And these are Claudia Manelli, Jeff Grothe, and myself, Peter Rust. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you on the second episode of the Campus Salt Show.